Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Forecasting and Scheduling on Digital Channels. I'm Rachel and I'm going to be your webinar chairperson today. Delighted to welcome a brilliant, I'm going to say expert panel of speakers to our webinar today. Welcome to his first webinar with us, Philip Stubbs from Atlantic Insight. Welcome, Philip.
Hello, great to be here.
And for people who missed your introduction in the beginning, do you want to share a bit about who you are?
Yes, I have a background in operational research, and I've used analysis and modelling techniques to improve forecasting, planning and performance within many organisations. And I've worked within many sectors, including utilities, telcos, retail and outsourcing.
Brilliant. Well, welcome. We promise to look after you on your first webinar. And delighted to welcome back Phil Anderson from the forum. Welcome back, Phil.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for watching this live webinar today. Yeah, so Phil Anderson from the forum, who are an independent industry body promoting best practices for planning, for data analytics and insight, quality and customer experience. Ultimately, we're here to help raise standards for customer operations.
Well, welcome back. And to complete our brilliant panel, welcome Paul Chance from NICE. Hi, Paul. Oh, I think you're on mute at the moment.
There you go. Yeah, hello, everybody. And it's great to see such a large group of folks on this wonderful day today. NICE is all about trying to take care of the customers and your customer's customer. I'm specifically been focused in the workforce management area for over 10 years now and been in the contact center for about 30 years. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of the changes that we're seeing that I think are every bit as monumental as when skills-based routing came about 30 years ago. So it'll be an interesting conversation.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to it. So before we begin, just a few housekeeping bits to run through. A reminder that we're taking a replay and slides. They'll both be available later on this afternoon on callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars. And also a reminder that our discussion is going on in our chat room. It's on callcenterhelper.com/chat, or a short term we've got is cch.chat. You just need to put your first name and your email address in. It is in a separate window, but hopefully with today's big screens, you can put it side by side. I've actually got mine on my laptop with a separate screen, or a lot of people tend to have the chat room on their mobile phones. Few added bonuses of being in the chat room is that you can download a copy of all our speakers' slides. I would definitely recommend that. There's lots of information, lots of tips to follow along with. So you can do that by clicking this link here. And also we have our buttons to take part in our quiz, which is coming up later on. So another reason to be in is that we are running our best tip. So we have a bottle of champagne, box of chocolates, or even an Amazon gift card for sharing the best tip. You just need to write #question to ask a question of our panel, or share #tip to share your top tips for forecasting and scheduling. So before we get into today's presentation, I just want to share a poll with you. So I'm going to share. So we're asking, what impact has COVID-19 had on customers using digital channels? So I'm going to put that up and launch it. So the question is, since 2019, has the number of contacts into the contact center, has it increased a lot? Has it increased? Is it about the same? Has it decreased or decreased a lot? Philip, what do you think? What do you think is going to come up top?
Oh, what I would expect to come at the top. I would say decreased.
Okay. Last few minutes or last chance. Oh, changing, and I'm going to share the results. It's running a bit slow. There we go. So 37% saying increased, 32% saying increased a lot, 15% agreeing with you, Philip, saying decreased, 12% saying about the same, and 4% decreased a lot. Are you happy with that, Philip?
Oh, right. Well, I think it would vary from, and as we can see from that, it varies from organisation to organisation. So yeah, so there's quite a spread across all of them, except for decreased a lot.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to stop sharing that, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to hand the baton over to you. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
And then I will start sharing. Okay, and I'll start the presentation. Can you see that full screen?
I can, yes.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Rachel. Accurate forecasting is the foundation for effective resource planning for digital channels to ensure the delivery of an excellent customer service and to maximize commercial outcomes. I'll be sharing some tips I found useful for forecasting digital interactions, as many as I can squeeze into 10 minutes. Please share your favorite tips in the chat room. Now, the importance of data accuracy, this has already come up in the session, but it's important to make sure that your data of digital volumes is accurate. A forecast based on dodgy data will deliver poor results, no matter how sophisticated the model you use. And it's really worth performing an audit trail and understanding the data tables where the information is coming from. Make sure you are counting volumes correctly. Also, since we wish to forecast when digital interactions arrive, then make sure your historical data is of when the interactions arrive, rather than when they are completed. Social volumes are often created by your CRM applying rules to determine which posts require attention. So to make sure you understand those rules in detail. Tip 3 is to understand when demand was constrained. With web chat, I see examples of it being turned on and off. And on periods where demand was constrained, the volume is lower, as we see in the red volumes here. So you should estimate the true customer demand for these periods before feeding into a forecasting model. Now, it's important to understand the historical variation in digital volumes. I'd really recommend investing time to understand the historical variation in the digital volumes. You have to understand the history to predict the future. Now, and ask yourself, why has the level of each digital channel increased or decreased? Don't forecast until you've squeezed every bit of insight out of the historical variation. Also, text analytics can help you understand this historical variation. And I'd say, I'd advise you to chart the historical data and label it with causes of variation. Take this example of historical Twitter weekly volume for a retailer. Study each increase or decrease in volume and state the reason. You will see changes in a chart that are not apparent from the numbers themselves. In particular, Twitter and Facebook volumes can vary enormously if issues go viral. This chart is weekly, but it's worth performing this too for both daily and within-day variation as well. Tip 6. It's easy to forget reasons for variation even after a few weeks. So I would recommend keeping a diary of variation in digital volumes. Now, I often hear the terms trend and seasonality used incorrectly. They have specific meanings, and identifying them can help with selecting the best forecasting model. Trend is a long-term increase or decrease in the data, and seasonality is where a time series is affected by seasonal factors, and there's a regular pattern every 7 days or every quarter. This Facebook data here is daily data, and it displays both trend and seasonality. Now let's look at understanding future impacts to digital volumes. Now, you must identify the individuals within the business whose actions contribute to variation in the digital channels. Build good working relationships, for example, with marketing executives whose promo activity drives social media volume changes. Get accurate information about digital volume drivers with enough time to change the resource plan. So there may be future details of a driver or the heads up for particular events. It may be necessary to hold regular cross-functional meetings to ensure you get all the information you need. and challenge the information you get, challenge the accuracy and the timeliness. With respect to your key inputs, you may gain benefit from calculating the accuracy and the timeliness of the information you are given and feed this back, especially if you believe improvements can be made. With digital volumes, it's important to keep very close to website changes. They can create big variation in digital volumes. Keep in close contact with those responsible for website changes. Get involved with A/B testing and trials, and keep close to changes to the social CRM rules, because they can make some significant changes to your Facebook and Twitter volumes. Tip 12, be conservative with respect to promises of a new system and process. With these and with projects to eliminate digital volumes, be very cautious with assumptions. The projected benefits are often not achieved in full and are very likely to be delayed. Now, the forecasting process. The judgment from stakeholders can improve accuracy enormously. I've had much experience from stakeholders of improving my forecasts, including other planners, support staff, and operations managers. Let them critique your forecasts. This will improve accuracy and also help build good relationships. Study errors and share with clients and suppliers, and graph forecasts next to recent actuals. So let's consider these two tips together with respect to this chart. I like to see this chart whenever a daily forecast is made. It allows me to study and learn from the errors, and also check that my forecasts are sensible compared with recent actuals. It can reveal issues with forecasts. For example, look at the last 4 Sundays here. There appears to be a problem here with the model under forecasting the number of emails arriving on a Sunday. Looking at the data and identifying issues like that can really help improve forecast accuracy. A couple of other points on this slide. Channel shift will change the total number of inquiries. Now, don't assume that overall contacts will be unaffected by channel shift. You may very well find that as web chat volume grows, that the inbound call volume falls by a smaller amount than the web chat grows. Also, I've heard examples of the opposite being the case, where customer communications have moved from paper to email, which has pushed inquiries from inbound call to email, and that the net result has been the overall number of interactions has decreased. Now, using scenarios is more important when uncertainty is greater. So during the pandemic, there have been many sudden changes in digital volumes, and a great deal of uncertainty still exists. Therefore, running scenarios, a range of different forecasts, has become very important to help that the digital workforce is flexible enough to deal with a range of outcomes. Now, let's look at different models. In general, there are 2 approaches to forecasting your digital channels: time series models and causal models. Time series forecasting methods only use the historical values of what you're trying to forecast, and they ignore the external drivers. Techniques typically deal with trend and seasonality and include moving average, bespoke models, exponential smoothing, and ARIMA modeling. Now, the last 2 are available in NICE WFM, together with a nifty tool to help you find out which technique would have provided you with the lowest error. And this daily chart here shows an example of how an exponential smoothing model called Holt-Winters is taking into account both trend and seasonality and projecting them forward. Now, causal models look at the relationship between digital models and other factors. For example, you might forecast Twitter volume using marketing activity or sales numbers. So the next tip is to investigate causal models. Now, if you have a straight line relationship between, say, emails and another factor, you can turn that line into a y equals mx plus c relationship, an equation using aggression. And you can use that equation to forecast emails as long as you know what sales is going to be. But causal models require 3 prerequisites to be in place. So number 1, you need a good relationship between between what you're trying to forecast and the driver or drivers, you must reasonably expect that relationship to continue to exist into the future, and you must be able to get reliable forecasts of the driver. And tip 21 is you might expect that causal models are more accurate than the time series ones because they're taking more things into account. But very often the opposite is the case. Often a complex causal model can be outperformed by a simple time series technique, often due to one of those three assumptions not being in place. In the initial stages of lockdown, many causal models predicting digital volumes performed very poorly, either because the historical relationship no longer existed, or because good forecasts of the driver were simply not available. Many centers moved to time series models using a small amount of historical data. Now, you may not find a good relationship immediately, but it's worth doing a bit of digging. In one project, I found a poor relationship between emails and the orders of that week. But when I performed a regression model using lags of orders, I found a much more accurate relationship predicting emails using last week's orders and the orders from 3 weeks ago. This was because the bulk of emails were asking about late deliveries, returns and refunds, and sometime after the order was made. Now, I've not got much time left, so the final slide with the final 3 tips. Try machine learning models. You can develop machine learning models of either a time series or a causal variety. You may find that one of them delivers the best accuracy. And if you've exhausted Excel, or if you're after more advanced modeling on machine learning functionality, then use SAS, R, or Python because they have very many options to use. Note that R and Python are completely free to download and use. Final point is some reading. I think the 2 best books on forecasting are Forecasting Principles and Practice, which covers the key statistical models with many examples in R, and Data Science for Supply Chain Forecasting, which covers machine learning techniques not included in the other book, together with many examples in Python. So those are my collection of tips for improving forecasting of digital channels. I look forward to hearing your tips. And now I hand back to Rachel.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Philip. I'm just going to put up a quick question to ask in the chat room. What did you like best about Philip's presentation? I thought so many tips, so much you've shared, but a few bits from me. Chart historical data and include reasons for variations diary, write that down. The trends and seasonality variations and graphing forecasts next to the actual was particularly helpful. Time series versus the causal method models as well. So lots to take away. Thank you so much for your presentation. We are coming across to everyone else's top tips and questions now. So I'm just going to put those up. So Jake's sharing an opinion. More recently for our forecasts is the energy crisis with the utility companies going under. Customers are contacting us more than usual to request refunds as they're assuming will disappear. Customers were also contacting more regularly due to being at home and submitting readings or setting up payment plans due to not working and their income being reduced. Yeah, Philip, a huge thing happening currently in the UK.
Yeah, and here's one example where judgment, applying judgment, because if something like this happens, there's very little historical data or very little to go on, and so it's really worth speaking to many people within the organization, finding out what they expect will happen, and build consensus with the stakeholders. Make sure that's within the forecasting model to make sure that whatever's in your forecasting model, you're working hand in hand with the influencers within the organization.
Thank you. We've had another opinion in saying more customers now self-servicing has reduced call volumes by 19%.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've had a tip in from Aaron who says engage with development teams to understand the roadmap of self-service development, as this may impact your future volumes in a positive or negative way. Phil Anderson, you're nodding along with that. Agree?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to know where you are now, where you expect to be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, which I think is about my 8th slide that I talk about. So yeah, absolutely perfect that someone's highlighting that. Often the information, as we keep saying here, is in the building somewhere. You've just got to get those minds together to do that sort of little bit of thinking and say, create the judgment. Again, another great word Philip used.
Hey, Rachel, one point on that. I think that's really interesting because the self-service is a phenomenon, and all the bots and chat bots that are going on in the industry, along with the IVR stuff. But what we're seeing, at least what I'm seeing, is the bots are taking the easier conversations, and thus the conversations that are going to the agents actually increase the average handle time. So they're harder conversations. And so while the volume is sometimes reduced, your AHT may actually be going up with the increase in self-service.
Yeah, and I know that you're touching on that in a bit, lots to do with AHT, so thank you. Aaron's definitely after the champagne. He said that remember that improved self-service that removes simple volumes may result in a higher average duration. Oh, there you go, for remaining contact types. And that may also affect the concurrency capabilities of the remaining contact when you're planning. Paul, I mean, it's almost like he's read your presentation.
I know. Thanks, Aaron.
Fab, and I know Phil, you're going to be touching on concurrency as well. So yeah.
I feel like I have no need to now. I'll skip that slide.
No, definitely not. So we've had a question in from Gary who said, what forecasting tips would you give to a new contact center introducing new channels such as web chat? Paul, I don't know whether you wanted to take that question.
Yeah, I think it's going to be challenging, right? Because you're forecasting without historical data, and so you're going to have to involve a lot of other people. I think this is a great idea of what Philip mentioned, involving other team members for their judgment and giving more than just one person's ideas on what that chat volume is going to be. There's a lot of variables there. It depends on how it's being deployed, is it buried in the website? Is it really obvious? Is this the first button they see on the mobile app? Lots of things go into driving what is that volume actually going to look like. So I'm not sure I can really give a quick tip to.
No worries. Philip, any thoughts?
Well, I think this is an important area for where scenarios can help. Do a high, a medium, and a low scenario, and then just make sure that you have flexibility built in to deal with any of them. And as soon as the actual data starts coming through, then you've got something to work off.
Yep.
Brilliant. Well, I'm delighted to say we've reached the second part of our agenda, and I want to hand over to Phil Anderson from the forum. So I will stop sharing.
Perfect. Okay, Rachel, hopefully you can see that now.
I can, yes, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, no, thank you. Again, some great tips in there as well, and hopefully that last question someone put on there, Gary, I think I might have 1 or 2 bits on there that can probably help you. But yeah, in terms of Philip's slides, I think I've got 9 of your tips written down here. And the other thing that I will just reflect on as well that I think is really important is you mentioned how people do misunderstand the word trend and seasonality. And it's really important, and it sounds so obvious, but just define them, because people often misuse that language, which ultimately drives wrong decisions. So yes, the only slide I'm going to touch on around forecasting, because Phil's done a great job. He's spoken about 25 of these already. And that is really what I'm saying is, before we do all those, I'm certain you've all got one great idea, is just to think about what it is we're trying to do. So I'm going to talk more about the strategy. Okay, what is the digital strategy of your business? Because one of the classic mistakes I see is that as forecasters, we love the numbers. We love sitting in a corner playing around on Excel. And actually what we're doing there is only looking at the historical pattern. So therefore we're only predicting for what's already happened in the past. And even if we've got great propensity models, we've got the wrong numbers going in there and it's not aligned to the strategy. So therefore our guesswork is flawed. And even though we might be doing the ongoing fine tuning, normalizing and adjusting, actually we don't understand the numbers enough. So we're only doing it based on our internal reference. But coming to Gary's point, actually, one thing that is really important is to think about, are we forecasting to understand how many people do we require? Or have we got a fixed resource? So therefore, we want to actually understand what is the maximum we can deal with. So in that last example that got put up there, if you're starting something new, you want to think, actually, yeah, we're going to start a new web team, maybe with 10 people. What's the capacity they can deal with? Then thinking back to, I think it was, I can't remember, tip number 3 from Philip. If you constrain your web chat coming in, okay, that's great to start the data to understand what's going on. But actually, when you start to unconstrain that, the data is going to change. So don't expect the same models moving forward. So as I say, before you do your great idea that you've just been inspired with Phil, think about the strategy and operating model. Okay, what is your business's digital strategy and whereabouts on that journey? Where are you now? So what channels have you got? When are they available for your customer? How can a customer choose what channel they're going to go to? How can we manage that customer journey, especially when they're moving between channels? Do we understand the cost to serve on each of those channels? Do we understand the true quality and customer experience of each of these channels? So by understanding the purpose of each channel, we can start to understand the customer journey and learn how they're using each channel, which in turn gives us better foresight to improve our forecast. Just imagine that meeting. Instead of someone telling you your forecast is wrong, you're actually bringing together key stakeholders to help set what that new forecast is going to be. So if you don't consider those things, as I've already said, all you're going to do is look backwards and keep trying to repeat what may be old behaviors. So really do think about what that strategy is. Next, and another one that often gets seriously mixed, is around skills and capabilities. So again, going back to that great question that someone asked before, when you do a pilot, often you choose great people, the people who really want to do maybe web chat for the first time. They're the ones who want to be able to test that skill, etc. And you're doing it in a controlled environment. Then you use that data to model the next group as you try and sort of increase it. And again, it's flawed because the new people are coming in aren't as skilled as the first group of people. You know, and so all of a sudden, you don't know. I suppose you don't know what's going on anymore. So also, as you start to grow, you start to understand which people can be multi-skilled across channels and which ones need to specialize. So again, these things don't come out in pilots. They often only come out when you go to scale. Now, this is really hard to do. Anyone who's got a great skills capability matrix in the background will know that means it adds huge amounts of variance to your resource plan, because you've got the random arrival pattern of demand along with the random handle times, now with the random utilization, with an ever-changing handle time, with a skills variance, and actually all of a sudden you just go, I don't know what's going on, and you've got a complex model and trust gets lost in that. So again, thinking back to tip number 21 of Phil's around propensities, sometimes just keeping things simple is the way forward. But again, if we've got a clear purpose on this and we're trying to move things over, sometimes we want to give a slightly inferior sort of service level on the channel we don't want people to use anymore, so we can really force people onto those other channels. Okay, next we have the data. Again, Philip started on this. I think tips 2, 3, 5, and 6 were really, really important on this one. So what we want to do is ensure we've got aligned data across each channel. Okay, there may not be a perfect match, which is fine. Just recognize that and report it so you know what that difference is. I think Philip mentioned in tip number 2 and 3 around making sure you understand the difference between when something arrives versus when something's completed, because those things can add up over time and make a big difference on that. So we need to be able to see what customers are doing. That's our priority. We need to understand what is a great seamless journey, but we also need to understand those exceptions and those dropouts where the poor customer journey is happening. That in itself can help us with our future forecast. That is developing understanding, which helps us identify root cause, drive improvements, and ultimately better forecasts, which then leads on to demand. So if we understand the context and we understand where we are on our contact strategy, we can understand and make sure we've got the right operating model in place with the right skills, with the right people in the right place at the right time, etc. So this is where you can start to create those effective forecasts. And again, when we are struggling maybe with data, if you think back to my first slide that I showed, this is where we might be better off saying this is the capacity our resource can handle, which is a much better conversation to have with people than saying, oh, we can't handle that, service level is going to be smashed. It lets people know there is a limit of capability there. Anything above that is we can't deal with that. So the other side of this is to make sure we understand that sort of incremental shift across channels. I think, as we mentioned, it's very common for people to go, well, introduce web chat, okay, and we want to see calls drop. As it's been mentioned a few times now, that means handle time can often go up, which in turn means there's not much of a saving on your FTE, your number of people required in calls, but they're now dealing with complex issues. That also makes it a tougher job for people. So imagine how hard this job is now, taking just bad calls one after the other, which in turn can increase the shrinkages off the back of that. As you can see, I've put on there bullet number 4, the concurrency myth or legend. Again, it always sounds like the classic man statement of only being able to do one thing at once. But if you think about playing a keyboard, okay, if you're playing one keyboard, you can make a great sound. Unless you're Rick Wakeman and you've got your multiple keyboards, you're only playing one keyboard at the same time. That's a reference not for the teenagers, I realise that. But again, unless you've got those multiple keyboards, you are dealing with one thing at once, okay? And again, too often I see forecasters obsess about concurrency. Is it 1.2? Is it 1.3? Is it 1.7 concurrencies? When actually, if you understood your advisor skill mix, you understood shrinkage, you understood productivity, and you just had a better idea of the forecast of where that was coming from, you'd make a much better forecast than worrying about the difference between 1.2 and 1.7. Finally, why it's really important to understand our strategy is so that we can know which channels to prioritise. As I've said already, too often when we're busy, we sometimes stop web chat. It's still too easy now. I'll go onto a website and you'll see web chat's not available sometimes, but it is another time. Yet the phone lines are always open. And doing that only drives the customer to think, well, I'll just phone them, which means you'll never actually get people to deflect to go down to self-serve. Again, be aware of just simple things like opening hours. What are the opening hours of web chat? What are the opening hours of all the digital channels like asynchronous messaging? And also, if you're doing something like asynchronous messaging, if you're allowing only one person to deal with one inquiry, just understand the impact of when their shift finishes, who then continues that particular inquiry. So yes, in summary, I do understand, as always, I speak quite fast because I'm rather enthusiastic about this thing. Understand the strategy and operating model first. Where are you on that journey? What is it you want to achieve? Start to track the skills and the capability that you need. Then start tracking the data. Do what Philip said in number 2, the audit trail. Understand when you're constraining stuff. Chart and label your data. Keep that diary of things. That is tips 2, 3, 5, and 6. Then think about your demand planning. Think about the capacity you can deal with and actually the service and quality behind that. And then finally, think about obviously ultimately the resourcing and the operating model. Final thing just to mention on this is that you're not on your own struggling with this one. We've got a networking group that actually meet this morning. The next session's the 9th of December. If you'd love to come along to that and just talk to others, that in itself is how we can learn, ultimately share our ideas and learn from one another to ultimately improve. But if you want to get involved with anything the forum does, just reach out to me. You know where I am. Rachel, I shall pass back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Phil. I'm just going to put up my screen and a reminder that in the chat room, if you could share what in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about Phil's presentation? If you do want to reach out, we've got his LinkedIn details in the chat room. So you can click that by clicking the download webinar slides button. But yeah, brilliant presentation again. I really liked, my takeaways, think about the strategy and who owns each channel and how you align the data. Don't just test the data, don't just test with the perfect person, the one that can multi-skill in the perfect environment. Think about it across the business. And also, concurrency, myth or legend, a very important thing to think about. So thank you very much. So we are coming to our quiz. I'm going to pull that up. So a reminder that you do need to be in our chat room. That's callcenterhelper.com/chat. And you need to use the buttons at the bottom of the chat room. So, you know, if it's answer A, then you click the A button. So we've got about half our audience in the chat room. I'll give you a few more moments to get involved. There is a bottle of champagne, box of chocolates, or an Amazon gift card for the winner of our quiz. It's only 4 questions long, so perfect opportunity. Fab. So I'm going to click start. So oh, I've got my thing in the way. So true or false, contact volumes spike at the top of each hour. Is it A, true, or B, false? That's true or false, contact volumes spike at the top of each hour. So A, true, or B, false. So you need to click the buttons to answer the question. So our last opportunity, I'm going to click next. Oh, actually very split. The answer is in fact A, true. It is human nature to look at the clock and contact the call center after it strikes the hour. Furthermore, this is often the time that meetings, TV shows, etc. finish. So David is currently in the top. So next question, according to our readers, what is the biggest scheduling problem impacting their contact center? Is it A, dealing with absence and lateness, B, meeting service levels efficiency, C, request for holidays and time off, or D, volatility in contact volumes? That's according to our readers, what is the biggest scheduling problem impacting their call center? A, dealing with absence and lateness, B, meeting service levels efficiently, C, requests for holidays and time off, or D, volatility in contact volumes. So, yeah, most people getting that one right. It was D. Frequent changes in contact volumes is the most common problem, yet each of the ones we said before presented were the most common scheduling challenges. Dear, oh dear. So, oh, bit of a change at the top. So which of the following is a real WFM metric? Is it A, contact center drive, B, contact center rotation, C, contact center spin, or D, contact center twist? Which of the following is a real WFM metric? Contact center drive, B, contact center rotation, C, contact center spin, or D, contact center twist? Last chance. And oh, actually, most people not getting this one right. The correct answer is C, contact center spin. That is the percentage of abandoned callers who will recontact you. Many contact centers will calculate how a variance in abandon rate will impact spin to reduce volatility in future forecasts. So, oh, another change at the top. Last question, last chance. If my button would work, there we go. Which of the following Erlang equations is not real? Is it A, Erlang A, B, Erlang B, Erlang C, or D, Erlang D? So which of the following Erlang equations is not real? So is it Erlang A, Erlang B, Erlang C, or Erlang D? Last opportunity. There we go. Yeah, most people obviously getting the correct answer. It is Erlang D, with Erlang C being the key ingredient with the Erlang calculator that we have on the website. So the winner is Brianne too. Congratulations. We will be in touch after the webinar. And I'm going to flick across back to my presentation. And actually, Paul, it's time. I'm going to hand over to you. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. This has been really interesting. I appreciate both of Phil's input. It'll be interesting as we go through this. I've been doing research on the effect of digital transactions. I finalized a survey that was done to several hundred global companies about what is happening in digital communications in the contact center. And no surprise, 70 to 80, even 90% of companies are expecting a rise in emails, chats, social media type of interactions into the contact center, while at the same time, there's like 40 some odd percent that are still saying their phone calls are going to continue to rise. And that matches perfectly with what we've been seeing, that the rise in digital does not automatically mean a reduction in the total number of contacts. It does mean that there are more options. And we're going to talk about the impact of those options as we go through the presentation. So when we talk digital, a lot of times we gravitate to emails and chats. And occasionally then we expand that out to Twitter or to Facebook as the premium social media. But there's actually some 40 or 50 pretty common types of digital interactions that can be coming into the contact center. And the key is, how do you support all these? Where do you get the data? And as was mentioned earlier, it's really about, where does the data come from? Is the data reliable? What does the data represent? Are you getting real-time data or just historical data? And how are the calculations for that data actually calculated? So how do you support all these digital communications? Well, let's take a step back. From a customer point of view, customers want to deal with companies the way that they want to deal with it. And so different people have different preferred channels. My kids tend to want to communicate through apps on their phone. And so they'll look on their app and say, okay, where's the contact me? And it'll open up a chat window, and they'll do that chat through their mobile app. I'm a little bit more old school, and I look for a phone number, and I try to find a phone number. But the interesting comment is, on average, this number doesn't change regardless of what channel somebody uses. On average, consumers tolerate about 3 poor interactions before they churn. And so the reason why this is important is, if we get the data, the forecast and the FTE requirements wrong for these digital channels, you're risking churning. Because if they get a few bad interactions, they'll say, you know what, I can find service someplace else, in most cases. So this was an interesting one, I think. Now, the question then is, how are contact centers dealing with this influx of digital channels, this tsunami of digital channels? And what I find is, I talk to customers all around the world, there's really 4 different ways that I'm seeing people do it. First is, they say, my WFM doesn't handle it very well, so I'm going to pull everything into Excel, where I can develop causal models and use all sorts of other types of inputs into my forecast, and I'm going to create everything manually, and then manually input that back into WFM to generate a schedule. The second way that we see companies dealing with this is, they say every type of interaction is going to be a different set of agents. And typically what we say, or what we hear is, we're going to treat every channel as if it's a different skill, and then create different skill groups on the schedule to handle those different type of interactions. So if I'm an agent and I can handle chats, I'm going to be skilled to handle chats, and therefore there'll be a chat group. And so we'll measure all the KPIs for that particular group. There's challenges with doing it that way, because digital channels introduce a lot of other variables that traditional skill definitions can't address. And we'll talk about those as we go through the presentation. The third way is, they've just forced every type of channel into a solution that's designed for phone calls. So most workforce management solutions were designed a long time ago to handle the influx of phone calls. And so what we want to do is, the WFM vendors come out and say, well, we'll just treat these as calls. Anything that's immediate is going to be like a phone call. So if it's a chat that requires an immediate feedback, well, that's just like a phone call. So we're going to schedule it, we're going to forecast, we're going to to handle our intraday stuff, just like we do for a phone call. That raises another set of problems that we'll identify here in a moment. Then we'll simplify all the chats and calls together, or the deferred stuff all together, and we just simplify everything dramatically. So you're either going to have immediate response or you're going to have deferred response, and basically everything's going to fall into one of those two things. Now, the problem with that is it kind of builds this house of cards, because if the data is wrong, then everything else falls apart. For example, average handle time. There could be several different types of chat interactions within your contact center. Maybe there's service, maybe there's sales, maybe there's support, maybe there's claims. There's different types of interactions. Each of those could have a different type of handle time. And if your handle time is all being normalized and genericized to one type of calculation, well, then everything else falls apart, because even if your volume is spot on, if your handle time calculation is wrong, then your FTE requirement's going to be wrong, and your schedule's going to be wrong, and everything else kind of falls apart. So what we encourage people is not to just sacrifice their accuracy on both components of your forecast, the handle time and the volume, for the sake of it's just simpler and easier to understand if we do it that way. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. We find that chats are not as simple as maybe we might like. So in this example, there's a 15-minute window, and the agent is sitting there. They receive a chat, and the chat is going to last for 5 minutes. But the first 3 minutes, the agent is in focus. They're actively talking back and forth with the customer. Well, at some point during that interaction, the customer needs to go off and maybe find their policy number. And so they go away for a minute. During that minute, the agent picks up a second chat transaction, and they chat with them for a minute. And the first customer comes back, you complete it. Then they go back to the second chat, and during that, there's some research time that needs to take place that takes 3 minutes, and there's no chat that's in focus at that time. Maybe a minute goes by, and now a third chat comes in. Now here's the question: how many interactions is this, and what is the actual time? And the answer is not automatic. It's not you just add up all your in focus time, or your total talk time, or the total time of the duration. And this even gets more complicated when you start talking about customer journey and escalations, where maybe something starts with a chat, escalates to a phone call, and concludes with an email. How do you calculate what is the true average handle time? So when you do this, and you struggle with how to do this effectively, the impacts are huge. You're going to decrease CSAT or increase costs, or in the worst case scenario, both. So your long range planning, because if you're not calculating the handle time correctly as well as the volume, your long-term plans are going to be wrong, which creates inaccurate requirements from your forecast, which means your schedules become inefficient. And even things like multi-skill efficiency factors that we use with skills-based routing, there's a concept that needs to be considered for multi-session efficiency factors when you build your schedule from the schedule generation process. And then how do you deal with the actual changes to make sure that both skills and channels are both covered? Well, what we did is we spent a lot of time talking with our customers about the challenges that they're seeing with these digital interactions. And so I'm not going to go through this slide in depth, but what I'd like to do is just highlight that here are 10 different aspects that digital channels bring that represent a concern in the contact center. Things like what happens when your average handle time is longer than the stat interval, or how much can an employee really deal with concurrency, cognitive load? At what point do they become overwhelmed? And do you set those cognitive load or concurrency limits at the channel, or at the agent, or in both places? Or what about simultaneous interactions, or are these channels interruptible, or can you set prioritization on different types of channels? All these things need to be considered when you're defining your forecast and your schedule around these digital channels. By doing that, you start solving some problems. So what we've done, one example here is around average channel time. I'll spend a couple moments here on this. We allow customers to actually define the calculation used for every instance of every channel, and you define what are the parameters for that average channel time. For some channels, it might be in focus time. For others, it might be in focus time plus after our research time. For others, it might be total handle time. You can create whatever calculation you like for that particular instance of a channel. So you might have 3 chat channels, and every one of them have a different calculation for what constitutes handle time that is right for that particular type of interaction. And so you can start seeing, by being able to set things like custom formulas for AHT, interruptibility, prioritization, those aren't handled at the skill level. Those are handled at the channel level. So we need to be able to have attributes defined at the channel level that the schedule engine will actually take into consideration when it goes through the simulation process and starts building what are my efficiency factors, not just at the skill level, but at the channel level as well. Now, there are a whole lot of other considerations that we're investigating. We've got a very robust multi-year roadmap to build this out, because we're not even touching on some of the things like key metrics. There are metrics that digital brings into the world that call centers haven't been using. Things like, what is my average response time instead of average speed of answer? And that would be the time that it takes for an agent to respond during a chat. Does it take 5 seconds to respond, or maybe they're working on another chat because their concurrency level is too high and it might take them 20 seconds. How do you measure that today? There's a lot of additional details that need to be addressed from a WFM perspective. So the result of doing it right, it's obvious. You get the accurate requirements, then you can start building efficient schedules by channel against that demand, providing that consistent level of service. So the goal here is that your service level goals are still met across all your channels. And by doing that well, your employees are going to be more satisfied, because they're not going to be overwhelmed. They're not having customers that are waiting for 45 minutes before they ever reach you, et cetera. So with that, what I'd like to do, I know I've thrown a lot of stuff out here. There's a lot of concepts. I can spend an hour just talking about those 10 challenges fairly easily. But we just wanted to introduce people to some of these concepts, and then NICE is addressing them. We come out with a new version in about 4 weeks, 7.4 for IX, and it's going to incorporate a lot of this type of technology that we've been talking about today. So with that, let's open it up questions, Rachel.
Yeah, so we're actually going to put up a poll so that if people want to get in touch and hear more about everything that you've been discussing today, they can, yeah, say, would you like to see a demonstration of the NICE solution? So yes or no. So obviously, Paul, some kind of key takeaways for me. I love stats. So consumers will tolerate 2.9 poor interactions before they'll consider alternative products or services. Don't sacrifice accuracy for simplicity. And your chat scenario, so thinking about the time involved in handling them and how much AHT varies. Yeah, a really interesting one. Thank you very much for that, Paul. Oh, it looks like I hadn't fully launched it, so there we go. No, I think it was just going a bit mad, so apologies about that. I'll end that shortly. So thank you very much for that. There we go. And yeah, I'm going to take across to our chat room of top tips and questions. So Gary's sent in a tip saying, to help with your forecast, understand your demand better, including disposition outcomes on your calls, or include tools like speech analytics to bucket demands and prioritize which ones to switch off. Philip Stubbs, you were nodding along with that one, so I'm going to come over to you.
Yeah, definitely. Disposition outcomes can very much help. When, for example, you're looking at historical data and there's been an increase or a decrease, and you can't work out why. Yes, talk to operations leaders, talk to advisors. Look at the outcome codes, and text analytics is useful to just look at what are the themes, what are the words, and what the tool itself is saying are the issues that people are raising.
Brilliant. And Paul, I'm going to come to you because it is talking about speech analytics and everything. Oh, Paul, thoughts on that one?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Around with speech analytics, we certainly encourage, we actually have some AI around that so that we can leverage the causal effects and what's going on. In addition to just reading the text, being able to read the sentiment that is being communicated to identify, you know, are the customers happy or are they upset or something. Those are crucial to be able to really identify. We see this being used a lot also in, you know, the open type of IVRs where it's free speech type of situations.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. So Jake sent in a tip saying, remember that when forecasting, don't just take into account overall volume. Look at all the individual channels such as ACD, web, email, etc. This will make it easier to highlight channels that are perhaps volatile or where you need to change your approach to forecasting. So Jasmine's asked to any of the panelists, do you have any tips for opening a new digital channel, e.g. chat or self-ticketing, and how to forecast these volumes based on phone email volumes? Phil Anderson, I don't know whether you had any thoughts. I know that there was a similar question before.
Yeah, I mean, of course, without knowing the industry sector and a few other things around that, again, I think it comes back to what's the purpose of this new channel that you're opening. If you think there is a link and a propensity between phones and emails, then yes, track the two. If it is just a new channel that people may use, as we've said already, day one, just start off, find out what happens. Day two, build from that. Slowly start to build up your data and your and the sort of tagging around that, and learn. Just learn from it. But again, just remember, if you're constraining it to certain customers, realize the impact of that. So yeah, something new, just see what happens. Brilliant,
thank you. So Susan sent in a tip saying, we're a small operation with 10 reps and we utilize the Erlang calculator on the call center helper website. Thank you very much. Nice little, we'll pay you later, to help calculate current and future forecasting based on new implementations, starting with us. This has been a huge in allowing me to have proof of the new hires we need to make. Oh, well, thank you very much, Susan. So Gary sent in a tip saying, join up your marketing and sales service and planning team up with regular planning meetings. Often forecasts are skewed because of unexpected demand driven by lack of joined up process on external communications or website change. So Sarah sent in a tip saying, the best voice / call takers do not necessarily make good chat agents. Different skills are needed to communicate via a written format, so make sure you have the right people in the right role. Yeah, we were chatting about that last week on our webinar, so check out callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars to look at the webinar last week on live chat and email mistakes to avoid. Brianne sent in a tip saying, it's easy to forget reasons for spikes or valleys even after a few weeks. Make sure to record them as they happen to have the most accurate forecasting. So unfortunately, we've reached the top of the hour. So I'm going to, unfortunately, yeah, that's it. So I'm going to ask quickly if you could write in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about the webinar? Today's winning tip comes from Jake 8. Saying, if you're not already getting data to track volumes, do so ASAP. It takes time to establish, but it means that when you need it, you've already got it set up with historical data. Otherwise, your projects could be delayed by weeks or months. But remember to always question said data. Where does it come from? What does X mean? So well done, Jake. We'll be in touch after the webinar. A reminder that if you could fill in our survey, it's only 4 questions long and helps us improve. Today's webinar, the recording and slides will be available later on this afternoon on callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars. We are back next week with clever ideas for managing seasonal peaks. So a reminder to register there. And I just want to say thank you very much to our 3 brilliant speakers. So much information that I've learned. Thank you very much, Philip Stubbs from Atlantic Insight.
It's been a pleasure.
Brilliant. And to Phil Anderson from the forum, thank you very much. And to your furry friend on your lap. And to Paul Chance from NICE, thank you very much. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Paul.
You bet. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you all, and join us next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.